The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery, and it's a beautiful day somewhere in the world, just not here. I'm Al Warren, and of course Eric Shapiro, the doctor, is on the show. Hey.
Good to be with you. How you doing?
That's good. Now listen, I've been watching a lot on TV, and I see that you, so what's this, you've got Jewish laser beams, and you've been starting the fires in California?
Oh, yeah, that's me. Yeah, that's right. All the conspiracy theories, I would bank on them 100%. Yeah, always, if you're looking for a scapegoat, don't hesitate.
Well, I was just wondering how you got away with it for so long.
Right. No, I think it's good for you to call me out because it's
Well, yeah.
You've dealt with serial killers before, so now it's a relief to me that I don't have to ever do it again.
Yeah,
I was actually going to do it tonight. Yeah.
This is like Jew Hunter.
Yeah. Yeah, the worst part of it was with these recent ones. The new normal. The thing to say was, there is no fire season anymore in California. Fire season's now year round. So it's especially me having two little kids. That was very unnerving. We're actually thinking of getting out of here.
Well, why are you causing so many fires with your laser beam?
Yeah.
Like, what's the deal?
Now, I was doing, I've co-hosted now like 10 times, and this is the sort of content I signed on for. The paranoia. I was like, when is he going to go full-blown tinfoil on his head with me?
Well,
if I ever had, the whole concept of Jewish laser beams is a contradiction in terms, because for me anyway, I'm so clumsy. If I had a laser beam, I would kill myself immediately.
Well, yeah.
By accident. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I can't believe that's in the government.
Yeah, yeah, especially with the
right,
especially with the Biden administration. We'd think things would normalize somewhat.
Yeah, she actually gets voted in, and she's thinking, I mean, holy cow, that's like really bad movies.
Yeah. No, it's insane out here. You're safer up there.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not going anywhere. No, no. We have fires too, but it's not the Jewish laser beams up here. It's French, French Canadian.
Canadians have fires in the fireplace.
Yeah,
we have a whole lot. We have 100,000 acres burning down.
Yeah, no, it's the same thing up here. We have the same burning.
You get hit with that stuff? Yeah.
Oh yeah, just as bad. Just.
We don't. Yeah, Americans are so narcissistic and self-absorbed that news never reaches us. We just presume what's happening right here is what's happening.
It's all about you.
Yeah, it's all about us.
Well, anyway, speaking of that, speaking of Jewish laser beams and fires, we've got, I guess you'd call him a horror author, and not horror.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Mark Allan Gunnells is on the line. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Wow. Let's see if you say that at the end of the show.
Okay.
You've got a new book out now. So you want to scare people even more. The book is called To Be, and that's an address, by the way. When your ex wants you dead, they will take you to the grave with them. Okay? Okay then. So, very cheery title. What made you come up with this book?
I got the idea for this book like 20 years ago, and it took me 2 decades to write it. But in my younger years, I lived in many a small, crappy apartment, and really the genesis of the idea came from coming home late one night after dark, and the light in the little breezeway of the apartment complex was flickering and buzzing, and it seemed like such a quintessential horror thing that I thought, no, but it's always houses that are haunted. They're never apartments that are haunted. So I got this idea for a haunted apartment novel.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So did you? Were you just breaking up with an ex at the time too, or?
Well, in my past, I have had some pretty horrific exes. So let's just say I drew from some of that experience when I was formulating this story idea.
So did you have exes that stalked you?
I wouldn't say stalked, but I had some exes that it was hard to get rid of.
Oh, I see.
Not as hard as the one in the book,
Okay.
but there were some people who just didn't want to go.
Wow. So what's the concept of the book is really about? Is it kind of like a stalker book, or is it even? Is there another angle to it?
Well, I mean, when the story starts, the stalker ex-boyfriend is dead.
Mm-hmm.
But the main character starts to think that death was not enough to stop him from stalking. So it's full of, ghost story haunting goodness with that sort of relationship drama thrown into it as well.
Wow. So you got a lot of paranormal in this.
Yeah, I love ghost stories and I love stories of hauntings, so I threw a bunch of the stuff I love about that into the mix while, trying to make it my own at the same time.
Are you a believer in the paranormal? Or are you more agnostic or skeptical?
I'm a bit of a Scully, which I know a lot of young people might not get that X-Files reference, but I'm a little on the skeptical side.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm an open-minded skeptic. I'm fascinated by those stories, and I love to. And I've met people who say they've had real experiences, and I can find their stories compelling, but not having experienced anything myself, I can't really say I believe.
Yeah, that's fair
I'm
enough.
I'm a little skeptical, but I am fascinated.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, that's funny because I some people too young to know Scully. I'm too old.
Yeah, I'm technically the correct demographic, but I never was into the show. But I knew what you meant when you said it, though. Yeah.
I know from reruns. Okay, how's that?
Yeah.
The old. Well, that's
I'm of the perfect age to remember when that was like a cultural phenomenon going on.
Yeah. It was like the early 90s, right?
Yeah.
I was busy hanging out with Courtney Love.
Yeah. Yeah.
In Seattle, everyone was doing heroin.
It's hard to remember anything after that.
Wow. So this is pretty interesting. So now you so where do you get your paranormal stories from? Like, where do you draw from?
Well, I mean, some of it is just the long tradition of ghost stories. I sort of pick what I like from those stories, discard what doesn't work for me. I also happen to know some folks. I'm good friends with a guy who does paranormal investigations in Savannah, Georgia, has his own company, does ghost tours. He's written several books about the investigations his team have done. And he tells me a lot of stories about, things that he's experienced, and I sort of use him as some research, and I like I said, I'm fascinated by these stories, so I do like to meet people and talk to them, people who say they've had these things happen to them, and like I draw from all that, and then I also just sort of make some of it up. And in this story in particular, like, I made some of my own rules about how ghosts and hauntings work. Because, that's the good thing about being a writer. Like, you can just be the god, and in this fictional world, this is how it works.
Pretty interesting. So now, does your with your books, do you get into the psychological horror, or is it a little bit more graphic and a little bit more slash?
It really depends on the book. I mean, I've written books that are specifically meant to be like homages to the slasher films I grew up on in the 80s, and those tend to be a little bit more gory and violent. Particularly with my ghost story stuff, I like to be a little more on the atmospheric and the psychological side. And with 2B, not to make it sound like more than it is, because it is just a fun ghost story, but in some ways I'm also talking about, trauma and how we deal with trauma and how people react to people who've gone through trauma. So I feel like I really got more into the psychological aspect in this one.
Mm. Well, where do you draw from? Like, what kind of horror do you consider good? Like that you really get into? Like, is it kind of an Alfred Hitchcock style, or do you maybe talk to that?
Well, I've often said probably my greatest influence as a storyteller is the original Twilight Zone. I grew up in a time when those reruns were all over TV, and then they did the 80s revival incarnation, which I also watched a lot of, but in a lot of ways that informed my idea of horror. I particularly enjoyed, it wasn't like some Gothic castle usually, or some, setting I couldn't relate to. It was a world I recognized, but things were just slightly off kilter. And that's what I like. As I got older, I got into the works of Stephen King, and I felt like that was what he did. He introduced a world that was familiar to me. It was like my street. It was like my town. But then you just insert that one element that's a little off, and that's where the horror comes from, the invading of the world with this otherworldly presence.
So, sort of sounds like 2020, but, geez.
Yeah, you're talking about the year. You're not talking about the show with Barbara Walters and John Stockton.
Bob,
that's where my mind went. Yeah.
Barbara Wawa.
Barbara Wawa. Well, so Mark, do you like? What is the main emotion you go after with your horror? I know you said you've done different kinds, but is it more suspense oriented? Is it more about, like you said, you love ghost stories? So is it more about being chilling and under the skin?
I feel like I probably more often do go for the more subtle horror. I feel like that saying that some people, that's not what they're really into, but I like the horror that kind of creeps up on you, that's a little more insidious, not necessarily so in your face, but the kind that kind of gets under your skin and keeps you thinking about it after you've closed the book. I like to sort of sneak up on the reader.
How long is this book? How many words is it, the new one?
Now, 2B is pretty short. It's around between 35 and 40.
Okay, so do you consider it a novella, or is it it creeps right up on the length of a short novel?
It's right on that cusp. It's probably really more of a novella, but I've noticed some publishers don't like that word. So
yeah, that's a tricky one. Yeah, because I think the buyer wants to feel like they're getting more value.
So it's being marketed as a short novel because it is sort of right on that cusp of being too long to be considered a novella. But it's also the length the publisher was looking for. It's a new publisher. He wanted to start out with some stuff that was a little shorter, just some quick reads for people to get familiar with his brand.
What's the name of the publisher?
It's Valhalla Books.
Oh, okay.
And this is their first. They published an anthology last year, and this is their first single author book that they're publishing.
Oh, that's really cool. Oh, that's an honor.
I was pretty thrilled when I was in that anthology, and then he came to me and asked me if I had any ideas for a short novel, and I pitched him a few ideas. This actually was not the one he responded to the most strongly, but like I said, it's an idea I've had for so long. Just bringing it up kind of made me think like maybe now's the time. So I wrote it in about 2 months for him, and we were off and running.
Oh wow! So it could be the house that Gunnells built. It could be like he's betting on your talent, which is really nice.
So hopefully it won't be the house that Mark demolished. So,
yeah. Well, you just take all the credit and none of the blame.
Yeah.
Oh. So when when you do this, like, so how did you find your characters? So you got, what is it? It's Berkley. Woke up to find himself in the hospital, and he discovered his ex was dead after a failed murder-suicide attempt. So that's a pretty intense thing. So you got a couple where you're saying that the one tried to kill the spouse and then himself or herself. Where does that come from for you personally?
I always had the general idea, but the characters themselves really developed as I started writing. I don't know, it's this weird thing that I don't know how to explain, but sometimes when I start writing, I know some general information about a character, but it's really when I get them moving and start putting them in situations that I sort of discover their personalities, which helps inform the rest of the book, because when I really get a firm grip on their personalities, and it's like, okay, so they're not going to do this at this point, so the story needs to take a different direction. But these characters in particular, I had a lot of fun with just discovering them as I wrote them. There was one character named Zane that I didn't even expect to be in the book much, but really took on a much more prominent role. And I don't know, that's part of the fun for me, is really digging in, and I don't do like a lot of detailed character outlines before I start. Like I said, I get a general idea, a premise, I start, and that's when it all starts to happen in the writing itself.
Wow. But that does cover a lot of emotion when you're talking murder-suicide, right?
Yeah. And it did, I mean, I think the reason I didn't write it 20 years ago is I don't think I was ready or equipped to really work with those intense emotions yet. Because, obviously when you start off with something like that, it ends up going in a very dark direction. And, I mean, the weird thing is, as dark as it was, I still was having a lot of fun. But those are very intense emotions, and I feel like I had to be a little more mature, if you could call me mature, to really deal with them in an effective way.
Yeah, I think you have to be of a certain age to understand it more. So that's pretty intense of a subject. So is that kind of an underlying theme or important after someone reads the book? Are they going to walk away thinking about that?
Well, I hope so, because like I said, I felt like in some ways I was sort of talking almost in a metaphorical way just about trauma that people experience in their lives and how we deal with it, how we try to get over it. And particularly, I feel like when you've suffered some great tragedy in your life, sometimes the people around you get a little tired of it. Almost like they're just ready for you to get over it and get back to being who you were before the event. Mm-hmm. And which can actually make it even harder for you to really deal with it. So I guess I want the reader to, somewhere in the back of their mind, be left thinking about that.
Yeah, I think there's a certain point when with something like that, it's going to change that person, period. So the survivor of something like that, like in this case, Berkley, he'll never go back to normal. I think they have to realize that it's changed. That old person is gone, really.
Yeah, exactly. And even when I delivered the manuscript to the publisher, some of his early notes, he was commenting on, some of Berkley's behavior isn't always that likable. And I'm like, well, you have to put yourself in his shoes and what he's been through. He's dealing with a lot. He's not always going to act the way people want him to act. I don't think that makes him unsympathetic. I think you can still empathize with him. But, you're not going to go through something like that and then just go back to everyday life like nothing happened.
No, not unless you were the one doing it. So if you had more of a, do you think you'll ever go back to this story or this kind of story when you have a fuller book to write, like more where you're not limited?
Well, in some ways I don't, because I always feel like every story is as long as it needs to be. I always knew this story was going to be more novella-ish length, so I don't feel like I cheated anything out of it. I feel like it had everything in it needed to have. But that being said, I do still, like, I have another version of a haunted house story in my head that I want to write that I think I would call imposter syndrome. And it would be a bigger story, and it wouldn't deal exactly with the same types of issues as 2B, but it would deal with I want to deal with insecurity and not feeling good enough, and, the doubts that a lot of us feel when we're pursuing our dreams. And I do think that will be a larger canvas when I get around to writing that one. Hopefully it won't be 20 years like this one.
Yeah, because then you'd be old like me. No, I think that, and I didn't mean cheat. I just meant that, because sometimes when you write something like this, you're doing a certain size book and you're writing a story, but sometimes, as you say, as the characters develop, you get more into the story, more in depth into what they are doing and how they act and react to the situation and to each other. So sometimes you learn new emotions or new ideas from that, and it's just I meant more develop it, go even further.
Yeah, and I definitely want to continue with some of these ideas. I have other stories I want to write first, but that other idea is definitely in my head as something I want to get to. Of course, it's jostling for position with a ton of other ideas I want to get to, and that's my biggest problem, is figuring out which one is screaming at me the loudest to be written.
Mm-hmm. When you say this one to be took 20 years, so that's obviously from inception to completion. Throughout that time, were there different points where certain forms of awareness would come to you about it or what it wanted to be, and we could go in this direction? Or was it more that the kernel of the idea had been there for a couple decades, and when you had an opportunity to execute with this publisher, you were able to jump on it?
When I first got the idea 20 years ago, it was fairly fully formed. I definitely knew the beginning and I definitely knew the ending, because the ending really was the driving force of the idea. Mm-hmm. Some of the middle stuff was kind of vague, but I felt like I pretty much had it, but for whatever reason, I didn't feel ready to tell it. And then about 10 years ago, I did make an attempt. I did about a chapter and a half, and I just was not happy with it. I loved the idea so much, and I'm not doing it justice. So, and when I finally did write it, I didn't use any of that stuff that I had written, but I don't know. It's almost like the time was right. When I mentioned the idea to him, it all kind of came flooding back to me, and I got excited. And I will say there were aspects of it when I was writing that I didn't envision when I first had the idea, and that was more in that middle part that was always kind of vague to me. But I stayed pretty true to that original idea I had 20 years ago. I just feel like I had to mentally be ready to tell that story, and that's just how long it took.
Yeah. Everything requires the right timing.
Yeah. So has this got a happy ending to it?
Well, I can't tell you anything, but I always say a happy ending depends on whose point of view you're looking at it from.
Well, okay.
Even the most tragic ending might be a happy ending to somebody in the story.
I'm getting an ominous feeling thinking about that.
Yeah.
We have to read it and find out.
Well, does he get to have sex with a ghost?
Al, you took the words right out of my mouth.
Well, no, I was just thinking
Well-
about that lady that married a ghost, and then now she's divorcing the ghost because they just don't get along in England. You know, it's a true story. I'm not.
Yeah, I wonder if it's easier or harder to divorce a ghost. I mean, they've already proven they're going to stick around.
Right.
So, in essence, you're in this story. You're really kind of saying that this desire, this need to stalk someone or to hold on to, you're like, no one else is going to love you, so they'll kill you so no one else can have you. That kind of thing is going on. It's reaching out, the emotion strong enough to keep this person after death to hold on to this other person.
Well, I mean, and I feel like when you've been in relationships like that, where it's almost like you just can't, like you feel like you're entangled with someone and you can't get untangled. I think it feels like that. You feel like, I can't get away from this person, and no matter what, even death might not be able to stop them. But, I also think the story, is going to provide some surprises and some unexpected turns for people, because it's not always, just like with relationships and love, it's not always what it seems. So I think there's some surprises in there for readers as well.
Nice.
So you never had you shot this out in a couple of months. So you must have done this just in the last year in 2020. So 2020 didn't bother you, or it didn't affect the way you were writing, or it didn't change anything for you?
In a weird way, it helped my writing, because in the early spring of last year, I got furloughed from work for a couple of months, and I was full of anxiety like the rest of the world, and I thought, I've got to do something so it doesn't drive me crazy. So while I'm furloughed from work, I'm just going to pretend I'm a full-time writer. I'm going to act like that is my job. I'm going to write every day. I'm going to write as much as I can. And in that 2-month period, I wrote a novella that I sold to a publisher that'll be out next year. But when I did go back to my day job, I carried that momentum with me, so that, every morning I get up, I come in here, I write, and I've been very productive ever since that. I was somewhat productive before that, but some days I would half-ass it, some days I would skip it. But since I got furloughed from work, I have been very consistent in my commitment to writing every day and treating it like, even now that I'm back at work, I'm still treating it like I'm a full-time writer. So it's actually really helped my input, my output.
So we need another virus to make
pandemic. Yeah.
Wow.
I wouldn't wish that on the world, but like I said, for me it was just trying to keep myself from getting so full of anxiety that I just drove myself crazy. I needed that outlet to sort of pour my anxiety into. So in that ways, it was sort of therapeutic for me.
And that must sort of help in writing this type of subject, do you think? Like when you have that much anxiety and you got all the stress going on around you and you're worried about stuff, it must go into your writing then with this subject.
It was somewhat cathartic in a weird way. Like I could channel, whatever negative, dark emotions I had into the story, and it didn't completely alleviate them, but it gave it an outlet that helped, lessen it, so that I wasn't so anxiety ridden, especially like I said during those months when I was out of work and wasn't sure when I would be going back.
Yeah, that's crazy. So what do you got planned next? What are you going to be working on now, or are you taking time off from it?
I never take time off of it, I guess, because to me, it doesn't feel like something I need to take time off of, but I do have, later this year, I'll have another book with Crystal Lake Publishing, a suspense novel called Before He Wakes, and I'm currently finishing a new novel, which is one of the rare non-horror novels that I write. I got inspired when I did 2B because I had had that idea for so long. There was a novel idea that had been rattling around in my head since I was in college that I decided I was finally going to write. I call it my more explicitly LGBT take on Rebel Without a Cause.
So it's more literary.
Well, I hope my horror is as literary as the other stuff, but
oh yeah, I'm saying in terms of not in terms of quality, in terms of genre classification.
Yeah, it's definitely sort of. It's weird that I think of it as non-genre, although nothing is without a genre. But it's not like horror or suspense, or although there are some suspenseful moments. But it is more of like a drama story, and I do those on occasion. And like I said, this one I just thought, why don't I finally get to that? It was an idea I'd had so long that I never thought I would really write it, and actually wrote it into one of my novels as a movie someone was making. So anybody who read that book might recognize it as a movie in there.
Oh, nice. It sounds like you're pretty productive. I mean, it sounds like, listening to you talk about your projects, that there's an element of you have good discipline when it comes to sitting down and getting it done. Like, you're not, I know you said that To Be took 20 years all in all, but it sounds like you're one of those writers who has the confidence to have a few things going on at once or juggling different ideas, and then if you commit yourself to it, you'll get to the end.
Yeah, and, somebody actually at work today was just mentioning, the different projects I have finished since I've been there, but I'm like, I just do it every day. I get up, I do the work, and it's fun for me. Like, I look forward to, like, getting in here to the keyboard and seeing what happens next. So
yeah,
I feel like I get to the end because I'm just dying to get there. I'm just,
that's
in
good.
a way, I'm telling myself the story.
Yeah, and that usually I've found with the process that helps it to be more suspenseful on the other end. Because if you're feeling that, there's gonna be a contact high for the reader that you've wired it together in this way with anticipation.
Yeah, that's my hope, because I feel as a reader I can tell when a writer was really excited about the story, and it's somewhat infectious to me as the reader. Like, I'm infected by the excitement the writer has for the story.
Right. What is your daily discipline? Do you have a daily word target you try and stick to?
I don't usually do word counts or page numbers, just because I'm the kind of person that if I put too much pressure on myself, it cripples me in a way.
Okay, yeah.
Like, my discipline is I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to come in here and write. Some days it may be several pages. Some days it may be a page. I'm not going to beat myself up about that.
What about in terms of the time? Are you generally in there for the same amount of time each day, regardless of page output, or does that vary too?
Typically, I'm in here for the same amount of time. Sometimes with the day job, because I work in a bookstore at a local university.
Okay.
So, like, when the new semester starts, my hours increase. So then I usually have less time. Typically, I have a good 2-hour chunk that I can sit in here. During those new semesters, I might just have half an hour to 45 minutes. But typically, I have the same 2 hours every morning that I can sit in here and work.
Oh, that's great. Okay. And do you feel during that period, I'm going to guess the answer is yes, but I want to hear your answer, because you said you have this excitement and anticipation to see where the story's going, and there's the joy of creation to want to get back to it and go back into that world. Do you feel emotional when you're doing the writing? Are you communicating in a way that's primarily emotional through your work?
Yeah, I really think I am, because it is all caught up in my emotions, and I can usually tell if the story is going off the rails if I'm not feeling that emotion.
Yeah, you start becoming too cerebral.
If I'm not feeling what I hope the reader is going to feel, then I'm like, okay, something's wrong. I need to rework this. I need to just go back, get out of my own head, and try to get back in touch with the emotional aspect of the scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. Pretty interesting process. Okay, now, so you have a website, right? Or
I have a blog, markgunnells.livejournal.com. I didn't used to update it that much, but I'm much better at it now. And I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, all that stuff we writers have to do now to promote ourselves. I've resisted the TikTok because it just seems like a lot of young people dancing lackadaisically.
yeah, Eric does that all the time. Tough to get him off there.
I can't get it. That's all I can think about. Yeah.
Well, it's been it's a good conversation as always. Glad you came in and told us about your new book or new novella coming out. It's called 2B. Our guest has been Allan Gunnells. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you for having me and letting me babble.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
The mission has been completed.
The end! By George, he's got it! It is the end!
I'll say it.
If you're lying to me, I'll be back.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.